David Okoro sat in his tall glass office, looking out at the busy streets of Lagos. From up there he could see the traffic, the people walking quickly to their jobs, the street vendors calling out for customers. Yet, for all the city's life and energy, David felt alone. He had everything money could buy: cars, houses, clothes, and even his own private jet. But every evening when he returned home to his mansion he felt empty. "Why is it so hard to find someone who loves me for who I am, not for my money?" he whispered to himself. He had tried many times. Wealthy women attended his parties, smiled at him, and called him charming. But once they discovered he was not ordinary, their smiles seemed to vanish. He had long since learned that money attracts attention but not true love. That evening, David called his closest friend and driver Emeka into his office. Emeka was a tall, strong man who had worked for David's family for years. He knew all the secrets of the house and the business, and most importantly, he was loyal. "Emeka," David said seriously, "I am tired of all this. I want to know if there is anyone in this city who could love me for who I really am, not for my money." Emeka raised his eyebrows. "But David, you are rich. Everyone loves you. Why pretend to be poor?" David leaned back in his chair. "Because that's exactly it. People do not see me. They see my wealth. I want to live like an ordinary man, work like an ordinary man, and meet someone who sees me, not my money." Emeka scratched his chin thoughtfully. "So what is the plan?" "I will disguise myself," David said with determination. "No suits, no jewelry, no expensive car. I will drive a simple car, pick up passengers, and live like a taxi driver. I want to meet someone who can love me without knowing who I really am." Emeka laughed, but there was admiration in his eyes. "Are you sure about this? This is dangerous. Lagos streets are not easy. People will not be gentle with a taxi driver." David smiled. "I know the risks, but this is the only way. I am tired of pretending. I want someone genuine in my life." The next morning, David went to a small garage. He bought a second-hand car, old, with scratches on the doors, a faded roof, and an engine that coughed every few minutes. He cleaned it as best as he could, but it still looked ordinary. No one would guess that the man driving it was a billionaire. Then came the clothes. David left behind his fine suits, silk shirts, and leather shoes. He bought simple trousers, a plain shirt, and worn-out shoes. When he looked in the mirror he barely recognized himself. Gone was the polished businessman. In his place stood a man who looked ordinary, perhaps even poor. He took a deep breath and said to himself, "This is who I am going to be, at least for now." That morning he climbed into the driver's seat of his new old car and stepped out onto the busy Lagos streets. He drove slowly, learning the routes, the shortcuts, and the streets that only locals knew. He passed crowded markets, noisy street vendors, and children playing with makeshift balls. David had lived in the city all his life, but now, seeing it as a regular driver, he noticed things he had never seen before. The dust on the sidewalks, the smells of fried fish, the laughter and shouting of ordinary people going about their day. By late morning he stopped at a small roadside cafe. He bought a cup of tea and watched people pass by. Street cleaners pushed their brooms carefully, hawkers shouted prices of tomatoes and yams, and young children ran between the legs of adults, carrying baskets of goods. David realized he had never noticed the hard work of ordinary people before. He had always been protected by money and power. Now, for the first time, he felt what life was like for everyone else. His first passengers arrived quickly. A middle-aged man with a heavy bag got in, asking to be taken to the next street. David smiled and nodded, pretending to be polite but casual. "Sure, sir. Hop in." The man glanced at him. "Old car, eh? You're not making much, I bet." David chuckled quietly. "I get by. The important thing is to arrive safely." The ride was not luxurious, but the man seemed pleased with the honesty of his driver. David drove carefully, and when they arrived, the man handed him a few coins. "Thank you," he said. "Most taxi drivers lie about the meter." "Not you. Keep it up." David felt a strange warmth in his chest. No one had complimented him on honesty before. They had only complimented his suits or his office. Now the man had appreciated him as a person. As the day went on, David drove more passengers. Some complained about the car, some were rude, others were kind and polite. Each interaction taught him something new. He realized that the world was not about money or status. It was about respect, patience, and understanding. By afternoon, a young woman flagged him down. She was carrying a heavy bag of groceries, her face tired but gentle. Her name was Lara, though David did not know it yet. She wore a simple dress, her hair tied in a loose bun, and her shoes were worn. Unlike the other passengers, she smiled genuinely when she got in the car. "Hello," she said politely. "Can you take me to Abiola Street?" David nodded. "Of course. Hop in." As she settled into the seat, he noticed something about her. She carried herself with humility, but her eyes were bright and kind. She was not wealthy, but she had a warmth that made the air feel calm. "Thank you," she said again, looking at him. "It's hard to find taxis in this rain." David smiled. "It's okay. I'm happy to help." During the ride, Laura talked about her life quietly. She cared for her younger brother, worked long hours at a small restaurant, and studied at night whenever she could. She spoke honestly, without exaggeration and without complaints. David listened, fascinated. When they arrived at her street, she looked at him kindly. "Thank you for the ride. Most drivers are rude, but you were different." David felt a pang in his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I try my best." She handed him a small tip. It was not much, but it was given with sincerity. She smiled and walked away carrying her groceries. David watched her go, feeling something he had never felt before: hope. He returned to the streets, driving more passengers, but his mind kept drifting back to her. Who was this girl who smiled at strangers, thanked them sincerely, and treated everyone with respect? She had not asked about his car, his clothes, or even about who he was. She had seen him as a human being. By evening, David parked the old car near a quiet corner and watched the sunset. The city was noisy, but now it felt alive and real. He thought about the life he had led before, the luxurious parties, the expensive cars, the women who laughed at his jokes only to take his money. That life felt empty compared to the small joys he had experienced today, the simple conversations, the smiles of people, the quiet respect shared with strangers. David made a decision that evening. He would continue this life for a while, not as a game, but as a way to find someone who could love him for who he truly was. He would drive his taxi, meet people, and wait for someone like Laura, someone genuine, kind, and true. As the city lights began to glow, David smiled to himself. For the first time in years he felt alive. He had left his wealth behind, but he had found something richer: the hope of true love, built not on money but on kindness and honesty. That night he went home, or rather to the small. The next morning, David Okoro woke up early in his small rented apartment. The streets of Lagos were already noisy, filled with the sounds of honking cars, shouting street vendors, and children running to school. He stretched his arms and looked at the old taxi car parked outside. It wasn't much, but today he felt ready to face the city again. Today he had a feeling something important might happen. David drove slowly through the bustling streets, picking up passengers along the way. Some were kind and polite, others impatient and rude. Each passenger reminded him why he had chosen this path. He had wanted to understand life from a perspective far from wealth and luxury. Every interaction taught him patience, humility, and respect. It was around midday when he noticed a young woman standing near a busy street corner. She was trying to balance a heavy bag of groceries and a smaller bag with her brother's school supplies. Her hair was tied in a simple bun, and her dress was modest but neat. Despite the heavy load and the scorching sun, she smiled politely at the drivers who passed. David slowed down and rolled the window down. "Excuse me, miss. Need a ride?" The young woman glanced at him, hesitation in her eyes. "Yes, please," she said softly. "Hop in," David replied, smiling warmly. She climbed into the taxi, placing her bags carefully on the seat beside her. David noticed her small hands trembling slightly from the weight she had carried. He said gently, "Don't worry. I'll get you there safely." "Thank you," she said again. Her voice was soft, but it carried a calm strength. As they drove, David tried to make conversation. "You must carry a lot every day. Do you work nearby?" She nodded. "I work at a small restaurant. I also take care of my younger brother. We lived together since our parents passed away." David looked at her in surprise. She spoke honestly and without complaints, but he could see the responsibility she carried. "That's a lot for someone so young," he said. She smiled faintly. "Life is hard, but we manage. My brother is my family, and I will do anything for him." David was impressed. There was a strength in her eyes, but also warmth and kindness. "What's your name?" he asked. "I'm Lara," she said, smiling. "Lara?" David repeated softly. "That's a beautiful name." She blushed lightly. "Thank you, sir." As they drove through crowded streets, Lara kept the conversation light. She talked about her small dreams, like opening a little shop one day or going back to school. She laughed sometimes, but her laughter was genuine, not forced. David listened quietly, feeling more and more drawn to her. At one point, the taxi hit a small bump and one of her grocery bags shifted. Lara quickly tried to hold it upright, but David reached over. "I've got it," he said, steadying the bag. "Thank you," she said, looking at him gratefully. Most drivers would just ignore it. David smiled quietly. That simple moment showed him more about her character than 1,000 words ever could. She noticed small things, cared about details, and treated people with respect, even if they had nothing to offer her in return. By the time they reached her street, Lara's bags had been jostled, but nothing was damaged. She paid David the small fare and handed him a tip. It wasn't much, just a few coins, but it was given with sincerity. "Thank you," David said gently, placing the coins in the glove compartment. "It was a pleasure driving you, Lara." Lara smiled warmly. "Thank you for helping me. Most drivers are rude, but you were kind." David felt a strange warmth in his chest. He had heard these words many times before, but this time it felt different. This wasn't flattery. It was genuine appreciation. "I'm glad to help," he said quietly. She picked up her bags and began walking toward her small house. David watched her go, feeling something he had not felt in years: hope. There was something about her honesty, her kindness, and her gentle spirit that made him believe there might be someone in the world who could love him for who he truly was. For the rest of the day, David couldn't stop thinking about Lara. He drove through the streets, but every passenger seemed ordinary compared to her. He remembered the way she had smiled at him, the way she had cared for her groceries, and the way she had spoken honestly about her life. He realized he wanted to know her better, not as a billionaire, but as a man who could be her friend, her companion, and perhaps something more. Over the next few days, David found excuses to be near the areas Lara frequented. He drove other passengers, but he always hoped to see her again. When he did, he greeted her warmly and she smiled as if they were old friends. They talked during the rides about simple things: her brother, her work, her dreams. She never asked about his car, his clothes, or where he lived. She only spoke honestly, laughed gently, and treated him with respect. One day, as the sun began to set, David parked his old taxi near a quiet park. Lara was sitting on a bench, feeding some stray cats that wandered nearby. He watched her for a moment. There was a calmness in the way she moved, a kindness in the way she cared for the small animals. He walked over and said softly, "Lara, hello." She looked up and smiled. "Hello, sir. Fancy seeing you here." David laughed lightly. "I like this park. It's quiet. Gives a person time to think." She nodded. "Yes, I like quiet places. They remind me of home, of simple things. Sometimes I just like to sit here and breathe." He sat beside her, careful to keep some distance. "Do you mind if I join you?" "Not at all," she said kindly. For a long time, they sat in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. David realized that he had never felt so at ease with anyone before. Her presence was calming, her words were honest, and her heart seemed untouched by greed or selfishness. "Lara," he said finally, "you are different from anyone I have ever met." She looked at him curiously. "Different? How?" "You are kind, patient, and honest. You care about people without expecting anything. Most people only care about what they can get." Lara smiled faintly. "We all do what we can. Life is not easy, but kindness costs nothing." David felt a surge of admiration for her. For the first time he felt that maybe, just maybe, there was someone in this city who could love him for who he truly was. Not for his wealth, not for his fame, but for his heart. As night fell, Lara stood to leave. "I should go home. My brother is waiting," she said. David nodded. "Of course. I'll take you home." They walked together to the taxi. She climbed in and he drove her quietly through the streets. The city was alive with lights, sounds, and energy, but inside the car there was a calm silence. No one spoke much, but they didn't need to. Their hearts were beginning to understand each other. When they reached her house, she stepped out and turned to him. "Thank you, David," she said, using his name for the first time. He was surprised. "You know my name?" She laughed lightly. "I heard the driver's name when I first got in the car. It's nice to know it." David smiled softly. "I'm glad you came into my car today, Lara. You've shown me a side of life I never knew." Lara blushed lightly. "And you've shown me kindness. It is rare these days." He watched her go inside her small house. That night, as he drove through empty streets back to his rented apartment, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Over the next few weeks, David Okoro continued his life as a taxi driver, but his days were no longer the same. Every street, every passenger, every interaction reminded him why he had chosen this path. He was searching for someone genuine, someone who could see him, not his wealth. And as fate would have it, that person seemed to be Lara, the young waitress with a kind heart and bright eyes. David made sure to be near the places Lara visited. Sometimes he pretended to pick up passengers nearby just to catch a glimpse of her. Sometimes he would see her carrying groceries, rushing to work, or helping a neighbor in need. Every small gesture she made filled him with admiration. Unlike the women he had met in high society, Lara never asked about money, fame, or luxury. She only spoke about her family, her work, and her dreams. One afternoon, as the sun shone brightly over the busy streets of Lagos, David spotted Lara waiting for a taxi. Her hands were full with a large basket of vegetables, and her hair had come loose from her bun. He pulled up quickly and rolled the window down. "Lara?" he called. She looked up, surprised, and then smiled warmly. "Hello, sir. Fancy seeing you here again." David laughed. "I could say the same. Need a ride?" "Yes, please," she said, placing her basket carefully in the back seat. As they drove through the crowded streets, they talked about small things: the smell of food from street vendors, the laughter of children playing in the streets, and the challenges of their daily lives. David noticed how patiently she listened to every word, never interrupting, never pretending to know more than she did. She treated him like an equal, not a stranger, not a wealthy man in disguise. "You seem happy today," David said softly, watching her smile in the rearview mirror. "I try to be," she replied. "Life is hard, but happiness is not about money. It's about small joys, helping someone, seeing a child smile, or even just eating a good meal after a long day." David nodded, feeling a deeper connection to her words. In the past he had lived surrounded by wealth, but he had never felt such peace or warmth. Lara's perspective on life was refreshing, and he found himself sharing things he had never told anyone before. "Lara," he said cautiously, "do you ever think about your future?" She looked thoughtful. "Yes, sometimes. I dream of opening a small shop one day or maybe going back to school. I want to help my brother have a better life than I did. But mostly I just try to live honestly and work hard." David felt a surge of admiration. "That's very brave of you," he said. "Most people would give up or complain. You face life head-on." She smiled softly. "We all have to face life, don't we? Complaining doesn't change anything. Only action does." During the drive, David noticed how the small things about her made him admire her even more. The way she gently handed a packet of groceries to a street vendor who had dropped something, the way she greeted an old woman selling vegetables by the roadside, and the way she laughed at a child who had tripped while running, all of it showed her kind heart. At one stoplight, a man jumped into the taxi, trying to get to the next street quickly. He was rude and impatient, shouting at David to move faster. But Lara calmly smiled at the man. "Please, he is doing his best. Don't shout," she said softly. David looked at her in surprise. Most people would have shouted back. Lara shrugged. "It doesn't help anyone. Being kind is more important than being angry." David felt something warm in his chest. He had never met anyone like her. Someone who saw the world with patience, who treated others with respect, and who cared about small things that mattered. Over the next several rides, David and Lara continued to talk about life. She told him stories about her childhood, how she had helped her mother in the market, and how she had learned to be independent after her parents passed away. She spoke of her brother, who was the center of her world, and her hopes that he would have a brighter future. "You are very devoted to your brother," David said one day, watching her carefully. She smiled. "He is all I have. I will do anything for him. Everyone deserves someone to care for them." David felt a pang in his heart. That was exactly the kind of love he wanted to find, pure, selfless, and honest. He wanted someone who would care for him for who he was, not for the car he drove or the money he had hidden behind the disguise. One evening, after dropping Lara off near her house, David gathered the courage to speak his mind. "Lara," he said softly, "I know I may seem ordinary, but I want you to know that I enjoy every moment I spend with you. You make me feel alive." Lara looked at him with wide eyes, slightly surprised. "Alive? How do you mean?" "I mean," David continued, "that when I am with you I feel like I can be myself. I don't have to pretend, and I feel something I have never felt before: peace, happiness, joy. I want to see more of your world, your life, your heart." Lara's cheeks flushed lightly, but she smiled softly. "That's kind of you to say. But you are very mysterious. I don't know much about you except that you are honest and helpful." David smiled faintly. That was exactly what he wanted. She didn't ask for more. She didn't demand to know where he lived or what he did. She only noticed who he was, not what he had. Over the following weeks, their friendship deepened. David found excuses to drive her to work, to the market, and sometimes just to the park so she could relax. They laughed together, shared stories, and even argued playfully about trivial things like which street had the best jollof rice. David noticed that his feelings were growing stronger. He found himself thinking about her constantly, even when he was not driving. He admired her honesty, her courage, and her simplicity. He wanted to tell her who he really was, but a small fear stayed in his mind. What if she rejected him when she knew he was a billionaire? What if all this honesty and kindness were tied to his disguise and not the real him? One rainy afternoon, David picked Lara up from work. The streets were flooded, and children were running through the water with laughter. Lara held her umbrella high, trying to keep dry, and smiled when she saw the old taxi. "Good afternoon, Lara," David said, helping her with the umbrella as she got into the car. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, laughing softly as she settled in. They drove in silence for a while, just watching the rain fall. The city seemed quieter in the rain, and David felt a sense of calm he had never felt before. "David," Lara said suddenly, "you seem different from other people I meet. You listen. You notice small things. You care about people. That is rare." David smiled, feeling his heart warm. "I try to. I believe that small acts of kindness matter more than grand gestures." She nodded. "Exactly. That is how I try to live. Sometimes people don't notice, but I think that kindness always comes back to you." David looked at her and thought about all the moments they had shared, her honesty, her warmth, her care for others. He knew she was the kind of woman he had been searching for all his life. And he also knew that he needed to be patient, to continue learning about her heart before revealing his own secret. As they arrived at her street, she thanked him once more and stepped out. David watched her walk up the small path to her house, carrying her groceries. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between David and Lara grew stronger. What had started as a simple friendship now felt deeper, something neither of them could easily describe. They laughed together, shared meals, and often talked about life for hours. Lara began to look forward to seeing him every day, even if it was just a short taxi ride to work. For David, each moment with her reminded him why he had chosen this path. She was honest, humble, and full of light. She never cared about his clothes, his car, or where he lived. She cared about him. But even though David's heart was happy, his mind was heavy. Every day he carried the same secret, that he was not just a simple taxi driver. He was a billionaire, heir to Okoro Holdings, one of the biggest companies in the country. He wanted to tell her, but every time he tried, fear stopped him. What if she felt betrayed? What if she thought everything between them was a lie? One evening, while driving Lara home, David glanced at her through the rearview mirror. The golden sunset lit up her face. She looked peaceful, humming softly to herself. He took a deep breath. "Lara," he said gently, "can I ask you something?" She smiled. "Of course. What is it?" "If you found out that someone close to you was hiding something important," he began slowly, "something that could change how you see them, would you forgive them?" Lara looked thoughtful. "It depends. Why were they hiding it? If it was to hurt me or deceive me, it would be hard to forgive. But if they hid it for a good reason, I would try to understand." David nodded silently, his heart beating fast. Her answer gave him hope, but it also made him nervous. They reached her house, and as she stepped out, she turned back to him. "David, are you hiding something?" she asked softly. For a moment, David froze. His mouth opened, but no words came. "Maybe one day I'll tell you," he said finally. "But not yet." Lara smiled faintly, though her eyes showed a hint of curiosity. "All right," she said gently. "When you're ready." She closed the door, and David drove away with a heavy heart. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Lara was at the restaurant where she worked, serving customers as usual, when a group of reporters entered, carrying cameras and microphones. They surrounded a tall, handsome man in a sharp black suit. His face looked familiar, too familiar. The restaurant filled with whispers. "That's him," one of the waiters whispered. "That's David Okoro, the billionaire CEO." Lara froze, the tray in her hand trembling slightly. She turned and stared. It couldn't be. But it was. It was her David, the same man who had driven her around in an old taxi, the same man who had listened to her dreams and shared simple meals with her. Only now he was surrounded by photographers, security guards, and reporters shouting his name. "Mr. Okoro. Over here. How do you feel about your company's new charity project?" "Mr. Okoro. Rumors say you've been living like a normal man. Is it true?" David smiled politely at the reporters, but his eyes searched the crowd. When he saw Lara standing frozen near the counter, their eyes met. For a moment, the world stopped. Lara's lips parted in disbelief. She felt her heart pounding as confusion, anger, and sadness filled her chest. She turned and walked quickly toward the back door. David excused himself from the reporters and hurried after her. Laura. Please wait. She stopped but didn't turn around. Her voice shook slightly. So it's true? David's voice was soft but full of regret. Yes, it's true. I am David Okoro. But please let me explain. She turned to face him, her eyes wet with tears. You lied to me, David. You let me believe you were poor. You let me talk to you about my struggles while you had everything. I didn't lie, he said gently. I only hid the truth. I wanted to find someone who would love me for me, not for my money. I was tired of fake people who smiled because of my name. Laura crossed her arms, shaking her head. But you should have trusted me. I treated you like a friend and you treated me like a game. It was never a game, David said firmly. From the first day I met you, I knew you were special. You gave me water when my car broke down. You cared about people, not things. You showed me what real kindness looks like. I didn't plan to deceive you, Laura. I only wanted to see if someone like you truly existed. Her voice softened slightly, but the hurt in her eyes remained. And now that you know I'm not after your money, what then? Do you expect me to just forget everything? No, David said quietly. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know the truth. You mean more to me than anything I own. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness. Laura looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned away. I need time, she whispered. I don't know what to think right now. David nodded slowly. Take all the time you need, he said softly. I'll wait for you, for as long as it takes. That night Laura couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of her small room, staring out into the quiet street. Her mind was full of thoughts. She remembered all their conversations. His laughter, his gentle words, the way he listened when no one else did. Had it all been fake? No, she told herself. His kindness was real. His eyes were honest. But still he had hidden a part of himself. Why didn't he just tell me? She whispered. Her younger brother, Teo, looked up from his bed. What's wrong, sister? She smiled sadly. Nothing, my dear. Just thinking. Teo sat up. Is it about the taxi driver? She blinked in surprise. How did you know? Teo grinned. You talk about him every day. Laura chuckled softly, but tears glistened in her eyes. He's not a taxi driver, Teo. He's a billionaire. Teo's eyes widened. A billionaire? Well, then why was he driving a taxi? To find true love, she said quietly. Teo thought for a moment. Did he find it? Laura looked out the window again. I don't know, she whispered. Maybe. Meanwhile, David sat alone in his mansion, surrounded by silence. The luxury around him suddenly felt empty. The big rooms, the gold decorations, the servants, none of it brought peace. Only Lara's absence filled his heart. He looked at a small photo he had secretly taken of her, smiling, holding her umbrella in the rain. She's the one, he said softly. I'll prove to her that my heart is true. The next morning David made a decision. He called off all business meetings, canceled his public appearances, and told his staff he would handle something important personally. He would go to Lara, not as a billionaire, but as the same humble man who had once driven her home in an old taxi. He would show her that his feelings were not built on lies or power, but on something deeper, honesty, love, and trust. And this time he would tell her everything. The sun rose gently over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold. Birds sang on rooftops and the streets slowly came alive. But in the middle of that busy morning, one man sat quietly in his car, lost in thought. It was David. He had not slept much. His heart was heavy, but his mind was clear. He knew what he needed to do. For too long he had lived two lives, one as the billionaire everyone admired, and another as the simple taxi driver who had found peace in ordinary things. But now he only wanted one life, the one where love was real, where Lara knew him completely. He took a deep breath, started the engine, and drove toward the small village where Lara lived. When he arrived, children playing by the roadside stopped and stared. They whispered to one another, pointing at the shiny black car and the guards that followed from a distance. Is that not the rich man from the news? One of them said. Yes, another shouted. That's the billionaire. He came to see Sister Lara. David smiled faintly. He got out of the car and walked toward the small house he had visited many times before, the same house where he had once been offered a plate of rice by Lara's kind mother, Mama Ruth. When Mama Ruth saw him at the gate, she froze in surprise. David? She said, wiping her hands on her wrapper. Or should I say Mr. Okoro now? David bowed respectfully. Mama, Please don't call me that. I'm still the same David who used to help you carry bags from the market. Mama Ruth gave a small smile. The world is strange. I never knew a billionaire could sit in my kitchen and eat with us. I did it because it made me happy, David said softly. And because your daughter made me feel at home. Mama Ruth looked at him closely. She has been quiet these days. You broke her heart, David. His eyes lowered. I know. That's why I'm here. I want to make it right. Mama Ruth nodded slowly and pointed toward the garden behind the house. She's there washing clothes. Go and talk to her. David walked slowly toward the garden. The air smelled of soap and wet grass. Lara was kneeling beside a basin, her hands moving gently through the water. She wore a simple dress, her hair tied with a scarf. He stopped a few steps away. For a moment he just watched her, remembering the first day they met, the rain, her kindness, her laughter. Lara, he said softly. She turned, her eyes widening when she saw him. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Only the sound of dripping water filled the air. Finally she said quietly, You shouldn't be here. I know, he said. But I couldn't stay away. She stood up, her wet hands shaking slightly. Why, David? Why come back now? Because I need to tell you the truth, not as the billionaire, not as the taxi driver, but as a man who loves you. She looked down, unsure what to say. David took a small step forward. Lara, I know I hurt you. I should have told you who I was. But please believe me, my feelings for you were real. Every word, every smile, every moment we shared was true. I didn't care about your background or your job or your clothes. I cared about your heart. Lara's voice trembled. You made me feel like I mattered, David. Like I wasn't invisible. But when I saw you in that suit, surrounded by reporters, it felt like I never really knew you. You knew the real me, he said. The man who helped people on the street. The man who laughed at your jokes. The man who dreamed of a simple life with you. She looked up, meeting his eyes. Then why hide? Because I wanted love. Not for my money, not for my family name, but for my soul. I've seen too many people pretend to care just to get close to my wealth. But you gave me hope. Tears filled Lara's eyes. You should have trusted me enough to tell me. I should have, David admitted. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me again. There was silence. Only the wind moved gently between them. Then, slowly, Lara spoke. You don't have to prove anything with money, David. I never wanted that. I just wanted honesty. He smiled faintly. Then that's what you'll have. Nothing but honesty from today. She sighed deeply, wiping her face with her scarf. You know, I prayed about this, she said softly. And I realized something. Love isn't perfect. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about learning to forgive and to grow together. David's eyes brightened. Does that mean? Lara smiled gently. Yes, David. I forgive you. His heart felt light again, as if the sun had broken through the clouds. Thank you, he whispered. She stepped closer. But I still don't know if I can live in your world, the world of rich people, flashing cameras, and big houses. He reached out and held her hand carefully. Then I'll bring my world to yours. You don't have to change who you are. That's what I love about you. You keep me grounded. Lara smiled shyly. You're still the same man who once helped me carry firewood? He laughed. Always. A few months later, the entire country buzzed with excitement. Newspapers carried the headline. Billionaire marries the village girl who stole his heart. The wedding took place in both the city and the village to honor both worlds. The first ceremony was simple, held under the big mango tree in Lara's village, with drums, laughter, and food everywhere. Children ran around, singing and clapping. Mama Ruth danced proudly beside her daughter, her face glowing with joy. The second ceremony was grand, a royal-style event in the city, attended by business leaders, politicians, and celebrities. Yet, even surrounded by luxury, Lara remained the same humble woman everyone loved. When people called her Madame Okoro, she smiled and said softly, "Just call me Lara." David often looked at her in awe, wondering how he had gotten so lucky. One evening, after all the celebrations, they stood together on the balcony of their new home. The stars shone brightly above them, and the city lights sparkled below. Lara leaned on his shoulder. "Do you ever miss driving your taxi?" she asked playfully. He chuckled. "Sometimes. Maybe I'll drive you around one day for old time's sake." She laughed. "As long as you don't hide anything from me again." "Never," he promised, looking into her eyes. "No more secrets." They stood quietly, enjoying the peace that came with honesty. David finally spoke. "You know, I started this journey searching for true love. I thought it would be hard to find. But it turns out, true love was sitting in the back seat of my taxi all along. Lara smiled, her eyes glistening with warmth. And I thought happiness belonged only to rich people. But now I see, happiness comes from love, not money. They both laughed softly, their hearts full of gratitude. From that day, David and Lara became known not just as a wealthy couple, but as a pair who used their power to help others. They built schools, hospitals, and homes for poor families. They started a foundation for struggling taxi drivers, giving them hope and dignity. And every year, on the anniversary of the day they met, David would take Lara on a quiet drive, in that same old taxi that had once brought them together. No guards, no cameras, no fancy cars. Just two people who had found love the simple way. Because sometimes, the richest people are not those with the most money, but those with the truest hearts. The end.